Hello and welcome back to Cooking the Books, the podcast which looks at the 4 food moments from our favourite A-lister food writers. I'm Gilly Smith and I'm linking the thinking about what we eat and who we are to create a deeper connection with food. This week I'm with Anna Jones, vegetarian queen of simple, creative, delicious sustainability in the kitchen, on her 4 food moments from her latest book, One Pot, Pan, Planet.
So yeah, I think these flexible recipes really, to me, are kind of, the future of cooking, because it's great to follow a recipe, but really, my hopes are that they're arming people with the tools to be able to be adaptable, be creative with what they have.
She tells me about her long tenure with Jamie Oliver, who helped to light her fire, cooking for the Obamas, and how a simple life really is the way to save the planet. I asked her if lockdown looked a bit like the picture she painted in her book.
Like everyone, I think I enjoyed the sort of simplicity of just the shift in sort of pace of our lives. I found it quite difficult. Me and my husband both work at home, and both run our own businesses. So we found it quite tricky to always make time every evening to sit around the table as a family, because we're always just juggling, as most people are, and definitely people with young children. So that's something that we really started doing in lockdown. We made sure we sat down, at 5 o'clock or 5:30 every day and had a lovely sort of meal together, and that's been so nice. I think in terms of cooking as well, there's been a big shift. I've noticed that, people who cook my recipes have just become a bit more confident, I think, in swapping out ingredients, in kind of just, that confidence and creativity in the kitchen, which I think some people used to be a bit scared of, swapping an ingredient and recipe or changing anything. I think that's really shifted, and I think that's brilliant.
And it is the answer, isn't it? I mean, simplicity, being a little bit more creative, thinking a little bit more laterally about what to do with leftovers, putting it all in a pot and actually having some kind of understanding about what you're doing. That's the answer, isn't it? To eating to save the planet.
I think it is the answer. And I think it's these weeknight meals, the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Monday night meals that we really need to, that need to shift, that need to change. I think people are always going to treat themselves at the weekend, maybe cook more complicated things. But if we can get these kind of weekday meals and, at the moment, weekday lunches and things right, in terms of them being really delicious, really joyful, but quick and easy and sustainable, then I think that is where the change will happen.
It's a long introduction, a real manifesto about how to eat to save the planet, which I am so interested in because it's so simple. You have lots and lots of recipes. I've never seen a cookbook with so many recipes, largely because you have massive sections on what to do with broccoli, what to do with, kale, what to do with sweet potato, lots and lots of different variations on a theme, which is so useful. But it's also the bigger, the more macro level of connection, kindness, eating together, those things that really make people rethink everything. And is that really a reflection of what happened to you in lockdown?
I think it is. I think, especially at the beginning of lockdown, where we found ourselves in a situation where we couldn't get bags of flour or eggs. And I never thought in my lifetime I would be saying that I couldn't get my hands on flour. And I think, that just emphasised for me the kind of delicacy of our food system here in the UK and worldwide. And also, it really just, I think, sort of pulled focus for me on the people that are involved in bringing our food to us, whether that's the farmers, whether that's the lorry drivers, whether that's the supermarket workers, or, the people who tend the stalls at the farmers markets, wherever you buy your food. And I think that's something that we have, over the last, couple of decades really lost a connection with, I think. And I really hope that, that period of time where some of those basics were taken away from us has actually encouraged people to question, that food chain and think a bit more about where it comes from, and really think about the humans that are part of that. Because I think when we humanise food, I think we have a lot more respect for it. If we think about the farmer, or if we think about, the picker, if we think about, the resources that are put into our food, I think we value it more, and we're less likely, to waste it. We're more likely to make sure we just buy enough, and we support the people who are doing, doing the things that are the practices we want to see in the world.
Absolutely. It's the hidden costs of food that you bring out, and you make us think about those things, and it's a really wonderful reminder of how wonderful food is, what an extraordinary basic but an extraordinary resource that we have, and very often, and too often, and we trash. I love the fact that you bring out the much quoted if global waste were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world after the US and China. It's something that I often quote in Cooking the Books, and people always comment on it. It is extraordinary. You give lots and lots of tips of what to do with leftovers. Is that something that you've come to fairly recently, or is it something that you really feel is one of the most important things to communicate to your readers?
I think it's something that has always been part of how I cook. When I, trained as a chef in kitchens, you couldn't throw anything away. I had, head chefs who, if you threw a couple of herb stalks away, they'd be pulling them out of the bin and saying, well, this can be a bouquet garni. You can, make a stock with this. So it's definitely, and my parents never threw anything away either. So, it's definitely part of me and part of how I cook. But I think definitely, as in the last few years, the kind of, focus on what the situation, we're in terms of the climate emergency, I think it's become more and more important to me to emphasise this with people, because really it's a pretty easy win. It's after eating mostly vegetables, not wasting your food, as you well know, and I'm sure lots of your listeners know, is the second most impactful thing you can do. And actually, it's not going to cost you any more money. I'm not asking you to go out and buy an electric car or, any fancy far-fangled ingredients. It's just making the most of what we got and actually saving ourselves money. So I think it's a sort of win for everyone.
Absolutely. I mean, last night I did your fantastic butter beans, which is simply frying off butter beans so they come beautifully crispy. I love butter beans anyway, but crisping them up is really gorgeous. Chucking a bit of tomatoes on the vine with some leftover kale, and putting some garlic and lemon and parmesan over it. It took me 5 minutes. It looked beautiful. It tasted amazing. And well, I don't know what it would have cost, a tin of beans, and I mean the kale was leftovers anyway. I mean, really almost nothing. And was a real celebration of what I've got in my cupboard, but also, seasonal vegetables. It is that easy, isn't it?
I think it is. And I think often the sort of whole, eating sustainably or even eating vegetarian food is often kind of, shrouded in this sort of mystery that it's something complicated, or, that you need to, be only shopping at farmers markets or whatever, but it's very accessible. I feel like, actually for me, those are the dishes I want to cook on a weeknight. I want a small list of ingredients. I want not too much washing up, because I think that's one thing we don't think about, in terms of energy. The more appliances we turn on, the more energy we're using, the more pans we've got, the more water we're using for washing up. So it's this whole it's this whole 360 picture of where the food comes from, but also how it moves through our kitchen.
That is a hugely important point, isn't it? You start thinking one pot, and I've got hundreds of books on my shelf of, one pot this and one pot that. But actually, when you're thinking about one pot, you're thinking simple. You're thinking often leftovers, and you're not necessarily thinking low energy. but that is the byproduct of it.
Absolutely. You know, I loved your episode with Ollie Hunter recently, where he reframed kind of waste as being called byproducts. And I think that's actually a really useful thing to do, you know, in our heads, to think of waste as actually, or, you know, or leftovers as this very valuable commodity, really. And you know, I love cooking with leftovers, you know, probably more than I love cooking with raw ingredients, because it feels more interesting and creative.
Well, it does, and there's a value in waste. You know, it seems a bit of a sort of a contradiction in terms, but I think the more we value waste, the more we understand the whole food system. I love what you do. Let's go into some of your food moments. Your wild garlic soda bread.
Yes.
Now, this takes you back to Jamie Oliver days. Tell us about your time with Jamie and whether or not he taught you to think in a campaigning way.
Well, I think Jamie was a huge, you know, I'm his biggest fan, and he was a huge influence on me. I worked for him, you know, I trained in his kitchens, and then I worked for him, kind of helping him develop recipes and do that side of his business for quite a few years. And I definitely think that massively rubbed off on me. I think, you know, the way he uses food as a kind of vehicle for change, I have always found very inspiring, and was lucky enough to be part of some of those crazy you know, the school dinners campaigns and lots of those things. But yeah, wild garlic, I remember really discovering when I was working as a chef in 15 in his kitchens. And I remember being like feeling slightly cheated. I was like, why has no one told me about this before? You know, it's this amazing free natural carpet of deliciousness. And I pick it with my son every year now. But we used to make a wild garlic soda bread, and a brilliant chef called Steve Pooley, I think it was actually his recipe. And we ended up making it, you know, working for Jamie was kind of, he was like a rock star of the kitchen at that stage. And so we cooked for lots of high profile people, but one of the dinners I did was for the G20 at Downing Street, which was wild. So we had, you know, the Obamas there, you know, all the world leaders. So, you know, no pressure. And we made this beautiful wild garlic soda bread to go with the starter. And the staff in Downing Street were very particular. I mean, everything had to happen like clockwork at the exact agreed second. And I remember, you know, the service was starting, and I couldn't see. Steve and Jamie were sort of heading up the kitchen. I couldn't see them anywhere, so I sort of had to start cracking on with They showed up pretty soon after, but I have to say, I was like, oh, well, no pressure. I'll just...
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it was... I love wild garlic, and yeah, that's sort of very happy association with my time with Jamie and with the wonderful people who work with him.
Yeah. And did you feel that, I mean, the work that he was doing with school dinners and you know, he is a natural campaigner. He has it absolutely in his soul, and he is absolutely genuine, isn't he? Did it rub off on you? I know lots of people have got their campaigning vision from Jamie. Did it rub off in the daily work that you were doing?
I think it definitely did rub off on me. I think I've maybe always sort of slightly had that gene. I did a lot of work around kind of, you know, in my economics degree, I did a lot of work around developing countries and ways to kind of look at aid. So I think it's always been something that I had an interest in, but definitely Jamie brought it out of me, and he showed me the connection between food and, you know, society, and, you know, really the bottom line, that if as a society we're not feeding, you know, our children, you know, on a basic level, well, like, how can we call ourselves a civilized society, really? And I think, you know, that the kind of breadth of and generosity with which he talks about food, and, you know, his incredible work ethic, I think definitely rubbed off on me, for sure. And, you know, I went all over the world with him. We did some shows in California, in West Virginia, where we were sort of, you know, trying to work on the American food system, which I have to say was much more difficult than the British food system because of the lobbies and, you know, all the paperwork there. But yeah, I definitely feel like, you know, his insistence and his passion have you know, lit a fire in my belly, for sure.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Tell us about you and your Welshness. Your Welsh cakes is your second food moment, and it comes from a family recipe. Where Whereabouts in Wales did your dad come from?
Well, my dad is, he actually grew up in Birmingham, but there's a big family with a very strong Welsh connection from Mountain Ash in the Rhondda Valley. And so my dad has got 12, well, he's one of 12, so there were 11 brothers and sisters. They all lived in, a pretty modest 2-bedroom terrace house that was absolute madness. And that's kind of how I grew up. I grew up with just this, sort of frenetic, passionate, vibrant, family, which was just really a fantastic blessing. There was always singing, there was always music, there was always jokes and winding people up. Welsh cakes was one of the things that my aunties used to make, and my nan, I think, before them made. And they'd always sort of bring them round if they came to our house, or if we went over, we'd eat them. And so there's a recipe in the book which is slightly adapted. It's kind of using their original recipe, but making it savoury with cheddar and green olives and dill. Welsh cakes hold a pretty special place in my heart. And I've actually, my husband is a Welshman too, from North Wales. So there's this kind of Welsh heritage all around me.
My mother's family came from Llanelli, and my grandmother used to produce these pikelets on a bake stone. And as I was reading your Welsh cakes recipe, I was thinking, I could feel my nana saying, no, dill in a Welsh cake.
Well, you know what? We do make the very traditional version at home all the time, and they're a favourite. But I feel like those very traditional recipes, there's other people out there who've written those recipes and done them incredibly well. These are a bit of a twist, and I guess they're a mix between a Welsh cake and a kind of savoury scone, I guess. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating stuff. The arepas. Now, this is your third food moment. Tell me about these, and tell me how you had these in the morning after your wedding. So tell us about the recipe first, and then tell us about the wedding.
So, arepas are absolutely delicious. They're a kind of little corn cake. They're, Venezuelan initially, I believe. And they're actually really, really easy to make. I don't know if you've ever made corn tortillas with the masa harina, and you have to use a press to press it out. But arepas are using a sort of similar cornmeal, but actually you just kind of pat them into patties and then fry them in a pan, and they sort of puff up and become these, somewhere between a sort of corn tortilla and a fluffy sort of bao bun or burger bun or something like that. And then you stuff them with, really, really delicious things. I mean, all sorts of stuff. At our wedding and in the recipe in the book, we have, black beans rich with chipotle and cinnamon, pickled red onions. We have some plantain, and they were the best food for kind of,
soaking up the alcohol.
Yeah, exactly. Soaking up the excitement from the night before. There was some absolutely wonderful people who came to cook at our wedding, and one of them was this lovely lady called Bea, who's Venezuelan, and she kind of just took over this fantastic, arepa breakfast, and I don't think we couldn't believe our luck, really. My son was really young, so I hadn't overindulged too much the night before, but there were a few sorry faces.
Your fourth food moment is a mashup, literally. It's a sagaloo shepherd's pie. You call it the standout recipe from your book. Why?
Well, I think the standout recipe is never really decided by me, and that's always something I find quite exciting when I publish a book. I always expect, I can never quite call which recipe is going to be made the most or people are going to get excited about. But with this book, it was the sagaloo shepherd's pie. It's not obviously a shepherd's pie. I use that term very loosely because obviously all my recipes are vegetarian, so there's no meat in it. So the base is a rajma masala, which is, a kind of bean, a very delicious, very simple bean curry. And that's the base, and then on top I do a kind of sagaloo aloo gobi kind of mash, so broken up potatoes, cauliflower, lots of spinach, and then lots of spice. So it's kind of got that comfort of shepherd's pie, but with the kind of excitement and, both texturally and in terms of flavour, of crispy potatoes, crispy bits of cauliflower, and all those lovely kind of Indian spices. So and that seemed to be the one. My book came out in March, and I think it was still pretty cold here in the UK, and I think people still, wanted a food hug for so many different reasons. It had been a tough year, and I think we were just craving comfort food. So, and I always find it so interesting because I think, as a cook and a chef, you sometimes want, the most far-fangled flavour combination, or the most pioneering recipe, or the thing that you think no one's ever thought of before, to be the thing that people love to cook. But actually, more often than not, it's the very simple, time-saving, easy ingredient recipes. And I think that's, knowing that about, which recipes have been popular in my books, that's definitely shaped how I write and how I cook. Because I want, the bottom line is I want the books to be used. I want them to be useful. I want the food to be kind and joyful and generous. But I want them to be used.
And it is incredibly useful. On so many different levels. There's the big introduction. There's a lot of information about it. If you really want to go deep into how to eat to save the planet, it's all there. The Oxford study, the information about waste, the connections about our choices. It's all there. You can really go deep, and you write it very accessibly as well. But then there's these endless variations on a theme. So, you can look up kale. You can look up cauliflower, for example. I like the cauliflower one because I'm always looking at a cauliflower and going, I'm not sure I've got to grips with the cauliflower yet. I understand, that vegetarians have come to cauliflowers in a way that I just haven't, and I need to get to grips with it. There are, how many ways with the cauliflower? Probably about 30 or something.
I think there are a lot of ways with the cauliflower. Yeah, there's lots of cauliflower recipes within the book. But as you say, I've tried to take the top 10 vegetables that we buy in the UK and give everyone loads and loads of ideas for each of those vegetables. And the thinking behind that was, obviously, it's great to have lots of ideas and a generosity. But also, so the recipes are flexible. So if you've got, half a cauliflower or 7 cauliflowers, you can then adapt those recipes. So yeah, I think these flexible recipes really, to me, are kind of, the future of cooking, because I it's great to follow a recipe, but really, my hope with anything I do, and I'm sure most food writers and chefs' hopes, are that they're arming people with the tools to be able to, be adaptable, be creative, and, cook in their own kitchen with what they have. So yeah, I think that's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I talk endlessly in my other work for the Food Foundation about, cooking skills. How do we get the poorest people in the country to have access to healthy food? And it keeps coming back to cooking skills. Where do you get the cooking skills? They're not going to be in school. And it's going to take a whole generation to get those into the family homes, even if we did have good cooking lessons in schools, tied up with understanding of, the whole food system. I have to say, I think you've nailed it. I think that I think that if those were accessible somehow to people, I hate to say it, but I don't know if everybody, the poorest people in the land are going to buy your book, but those ideas, I think, are the key, because you take a vegetable that's in your fridge and you say, okay, what can I do with this? And you're given 20 different ways, 20, 30 different ways, and you get it. You get it. By trying to save on waste and save money, you're gathering up your cooking skills. How do you think you could get those out into the world? It's all very well writing for The Guardian, but, how do you get those out of the middle-class bubble into the world where it really needs to be absorbed?
Yeah, I think that's really a really big question, and something I've thought a lot about, actually, because I'm very aware that the books that I write are bought by a certain person, and definitely the articles I write are also read by Guardian readers essentially, and sometimes other papers, but it feels very important to me to be making inroads into that, and obviously I had a lot of exposure to that in the work I did with Jamie Oliver, both in the school dinners where I was physically in the school kitchen with Nora. I don't know if you remember that wonderful Irish dinner lady who was on that series. So I was in there cooking with her, trying to persuade her that, the turkey twizzlers were not a good idea. And then I did quite a lot of work going around the country in the Ministry of Food hubs that Jamie set up, which were sort of regional cooking schools. So it's something I'm always thinking about, and especially having a kind of 5-year-old son now who's, at our local school. I'm thinking about how I can help with that, and I've been speaking to the brilliant Bea Wilson from Taste Ed about how I can perhaps work with her on, just helping use the skills that I have to kind of, help educate the younger generation on how, we look at food. I think that the stuff that chefs in schools are doing is amazing. They're I'm sure you know them, Gilly, but they're a brilliant organisation where they get, professional chefs who perhaps don't want to work in restaurants anymore to come and cook in schools. And they've got a lovely thing called the Hackney School of Food, which is 2 minutes from where I live, where they're going to be cooking, teaching kids about food and how to cook. So I'm hoping through those organisations I can help have some impact. I think and I'm constantly in touch with Jamie Oliver and his team about the campaigns that they do and how I can support those as well, especially all the stuff around, the recent food bill, which, the agriculture bill, which unfortunately we did not get the result that we wanted. But, I think there are some brilliant organisations around, and I feel like it's more powerful for me to lend my support to those than perhaps start something of my own.
Thanks for listening. You can buy all the books featured on Cooking the Books by clicking on the bookshop tab at gillysmith.com. And while you're there, do sign up for the newsletter to keep up with all my news about the retreats. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, and I'll see you next week when I'm talking to Kim Duke, co-founder of Life Kitchen, the cookery classes for people living with cancer, about her debut super flavour cookbook, Weekly Provisions.